Michael Phelps will always be remembered for his accolades in the pool. His work ethic, his physique, and his process are all things many people should be inspired by. He, like many great athletes, is looked at as being almost superhuman. It's just as important to remember that Michael is very human. He can experience anxiety, fear, sadness, and depression just like everyone else. The highs with Michael's career also came with unbelievable lows. This is Michael talking about some of the very dark moments that he had over the course of his career.
I guess my first depression spell was in 2004 after my second Olympics. You know, that feeling of working towards something for 4 years and then you get to the end and you're like, what do I do? Where do I go, right? Like, I gotta suit back up and go 4 more years to get this one opportunity. You're lost. After 2008, winning 8 gold medals, again, post-Olympic depression. First DUI was in 2004. Second DUI was in 2014.
Michael is an incredible reminder that even the greatest achievers can struggle with mental health. In this episode, we're going to focus on the struggles Michael and other athletes can face and the strategies that Michael and others continue to use daily to stay on top of their mental health. According to the International Olympic Committee, mental health in elite athletes toolkit, as high as 33.6% of elite athletes report symptoms of anxiety or depression. Athletes also have higher instances of eating disorders and high-risk behaviors like gambling and alcohol misuse than the normal population. In the very worst case, this can lead to suicidal ideation. According to a 2020 study, 1 in 6 international athletes reported having experienced suicidal ideation over the course of their career. All of these numbers are incredibly too high for athletes or for the general population as well. The goal of this episode is to help spread awareness of these issues and some actionable ways to combat them. A huge inspiration for this episode is the documentary Michael Phelps put together called The Weight of Gold. It profiles many different Olympians speaking candidly about their mental health. I highly recommend giving it a watch, and this is an excerpt from Michael talking about what this documentary meant to him and why he created it.
You know, losing way too many of our family members in the Olympic world over the last 5 years. Like I want to cry every time I think about it. So, for me,
by losing, you mean to suicide?
Committing suicide, yes. So for me to be able to do this documentary with the athletes that we had who were so vulnerable, I can't thank them enough for opening up and being them, being their authentic self and feeling, I guess, sharing some stories about what we experience and what we go through. But, there's a massive stigma around mental health. And this is something that a journey that I've started on and I'm breaking the wall down as fast as I can. The more that people stand up and talk about their stories and their struggles, we're going to break it down piece by piece. And doing this documentary, I feel is an awesome first step.
I also want to make it clear that I'm not a doctor or a mental health professional. This podcast is based on my observations from Michael's stories and from outside research, and it should not be considered medical advice. I'll be bringing on health professionals as well as guests later in the series to talk more specifically about these important topics. I'll also link all the research that I looked at and suicide prevention hotline and quite a few other resources for anyone who is interested in those resources that are focused and from real professionals in this space. With that being said, this first part of this episode is going to be focused on the mental health really endemic in elite athletes. We're going to talk about some of the challenges that these athletes face and why some of the environments associated with sports can perpetuate some of these conditions. I think it's really important to spread awareness and to understand some of these things. One of the biggest problems for these athletes is they're not aware that some of these things that they're feeling can be helped by speaking to professionals or through some of these different protocols. I leaned heavily on research compiled by the International Olympic Committee for this episode. I highly recommend looking into those research papers, the toolkits that the IOC provides. I've also interviewed Dr. Grandner and hopefully another medical professional or research around this area who has actually worked on these IOC documents. We're going to start this section talking about ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. This is seen in younger populations. It also is seen in adult populations, but it usually shows up during the younger stage in athletes. This has also shown up specifically in Roger Federer as well as in Michael Phelps. Roger Federer, I think, was not necessarily diagnosed. Michael Phelps was diagnosed by a doctor and he was prescribed medication for this. Athletes, it's very likely from the research that they could be seeing higher instances of ADHD than the regular population. And from my experience, I personally think this is the case. This is continually being looked at and being evaluated now. So we don't know if there's necessarily data to support that, but I think it's safe to say that we can postulate about that. What are some of the symptoms of a child or an adult with ADHD? So for example, one of them is that they have trouble sitting still. So Michael says, I was a handful at the dinner table because I always had to do something with my hands. In my middle fingers, I like to twirl pens and pencils, but if they weren't available at dinner, I might try to substitute a salt shaker or a steak knife. Once I finished eating my food, I used to play with it. Take some ketchup, some mayonnaise, some sugar, a few potatoes, some spinach, and just mix them all together as if I was making a casserole. This is for a lot of people, a little bit of a benign symptom, but seeing behavior like this can be stigmatized. It can also mean that they have are looked at differently by their peers, by their teachers, by their parents, whoever that might be. Another thing that children or people with ADHD struggle with, especially when they're younger, is emotional regulation. Michael says, some kids threw fits when things didn't go well. I'd throw my goggles. With an outfielder's throwing arm, I could get some pretty good distance from a very energetic windup. To be fair, I had a lot of practice. One afternoon, a kid from Delaware beat me in the 200-yard freestyle at a meet in Princeton, New Jersey. I remember the feeling of goggle tossing urge up inside me. This could be a really good heave, I thought. I'm really mad about this. Instead, I kept it inside. I let it simmer and waited for it to boil over during the remaining races. I had more events that meet, won each of them, and equaled a national age group record. It was uncharacteristic of me not to vent publicly, but that's what I did back then when things didn't go well. But it was a good lesson that I could find more constructive outlets for my frustrations by keeping my mouth shut, getting back in the pool, and kicking everyone's butt. If I could only remember that all the time. So this is a very mature and a effective way for Michael to manage his ADHD, is to be able to channel some of these feelings, these really strong sort of uncontrollable urges, into something productive. Again, something that I really want to highlight with ADHD in particular is kids who have symptoms like this, they generally are criticized a lot more than their peers. And this can have long-standing effects. This is a conversation that Michael's mom had with one of his teachers. Michael just can't focus on anything, she told my mom. Well, she answered, maybe he's bored with what he's being taught. This didn't go over well. Miss Phelps, you're not insinuating that Michael is especially gifted, are you? I just don't ever see him being able to focus on anything in his life. I was a hyperactive kid who loved being with his friends and his family, but still caused trouble for anyone. This is very common with kids with ADHD. They're characterized as not being able to focus on anything. They're told they can't focus on anything. They're constantly being sort of put down and having a limit being put on what they can do. If you've studied Michael Phelps, if you really think about it, he was one of the people that had the greatest ability to focus maybe of all time on swimming. But this teacher couldn't see that aspect of his life. So kids are improperly judged on their ability to focus just because of how they handle themselves in specific situations. A lot of the time with kids with ADHD, they have trouble focusing in class, they have trouble sitting still, but in different areas of their life, they can achieve something like a hyperfocus. Also, there's been pretty good research, and I've linked it below, that kids with ADHD are dramatically more likely to have shaming comments made about them, especially from teachers, from parents, from coaches, from people of authority. And this can have really terrible negative long-term consequences and effects. Associated with this idea of shaming, there's also a stigma associated with these kids and also medicating and trying to manage these symptoms. Michael said, I can think of only one time when I really tried to override her. He's talking about a conversation with his mom. It was in 7th grade, and I was fed up with having to take Ritalin. I looked at it as a crutch, and I didn't need to be slinking off to the nurse anymore. This wasn't coming from anyone else. This was me. I wanted to be rid of it. Michael, you know how you lose concentration. Michael said, I'll concentrate harder. You know how you don't like to read the whole chapter in one sitting. Mom, I'll concentrate harder. You know how you start talking to other kids in the middle of lectures. Mom, I know I have to work harder. If I start hearing from your teachers, Mom, I really want to do this. I need to do this. It's time. We spoke to Dr. Wax about it, and he gradually started weaning me off the medication. First, eliminating the afternoon dose so I wouldn't have to take it during school, then the frequency of the other doses. And by the next year, all of it. The crutch was gone, and I learned what it was like to set a goal that was difficult to achieve and win. This was big, and not just because I was off the medicine. I had proven to myself that I could set a goal, and through willpower and being mentally tough, not only meet that goal, but beat it. And also, I dedicated myself to my goals. If I worked as hard as I could accomplish anything. So Michael did not like having to go in the middle of the day to take his medication. He didn't like having that appearance of needing this crutch to his peers. Again, this is stigmatized, especially with kids that don't necessarily understand how your mind works and how things are going. I will say, I think pharmacological intervention is very useful. I think the science really supports this, especially in kids. There's been good research that I will link around how pharmacological intervention early on can, even without pharmacological intervention later, have good lasting effects on brain chemistry for kids with ADHD. I will also say something that Michael has overlooked a little bit here is the importance of routine and structure for managing these symptoms. For most people, willpower is not enough to overcome ADHD. It's about creating good systems. Exercise is actually an incredible outlet for managing some of these symptoms. And it's about a comprehensive approach where sometimes pharmacological intervention medicine is valuable. Sometimes it is not needed. And sometimes people grow out of the need for pharmacological intervention. Something that we also see is that exercise is one of the best things for helping to manage ADHD symptoms. Michael found swimming and sports in general to be a major safe haven for him. So this is before he was diagnosed. It'd be a couple of years yet until I'd be diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. All everyone knew, in particular my mom, my sisters, and my coaches, was that I had all this energy and that I could bleed it off a lot by playing sports: baseball, soccer, lacrosse, swimming, you name it. What I discovered soon after starting to swim was that the pool was a safe haven. I certainly couldn't have put it into words then, but can look back and see it now. 2 walls on either end, lane lines on either side, a black stripe at the bottom for direction. I could go fast in the pool, it turned out, in part because of being in the pool slowed down my mind. In the water, I felt for the first time in control. Swimmers like to say that they can feel the water. Even early on, I felt it. I didn't have to fight the water. Instead, I could feel how I moved in it, how to be balanced, what it might take to go faster or slower. And I think this is really good. I think that a lot of kids find a love of sports, kids with ADHD, because it allows them to exert and expend a lot of this energy really quickly. It allows them an outlet for a lot of these things. I think one of the challenges, especially as it relates to athletes, is what happens when this safe haven becomes work. What happens when it's not necessarily fun anymore? What happens when this place that is safe for you to work and is a good, relaxing place for your mental health becomes stressful and competitive? And I think that there's a really important balance that we find there. So, for example, we saw this with Kobe Bryant. So Kobe, after his sexual assault allegations, the basketball court was no longer a safe place for him. He had to go through this mental process of creating this alter ego in order to be able to make basketball fun again, in order for him to distance from the fans and to create this safe haven again. And that's something I think athletes really have to pay attention to, is how do I keep this fun? How do I keep this mentally sustaining for me, while also competing at the highest level and bringing everything attached to that? Again, we saw this in Roger Federer as well. Roger and Michael were both fundamentally different from other kids. And I'll also say that ADHD, there's a lot of comorbidity with depression. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about ADHD first, is one, we see it in younger kids more consistently. And there's also this relationship to major depressive disorder. And these two are linked in some sense. I think a lot of the link could be related to the stigma and how these people with ADHD are treated. So something that I think is really important for coaches and parents and anyone else, and again, I'm not a medical professional. My girlfriend is a specialist in ADHD, and I have ADHD. So I think it's important for us to think about, how do you handle or work with kids with ADHD? Something that I've observed and the research supports is that a lot of the time, kids with ADHD, they want to do better. They want to sit still. They want to do a lot of these things, but they just can't. And penalizing kids for things that, in effect, they don't have control over is something that doesn't usually work. So the same thing that we look at with sports and coaching, you challenge kids, you penalize them, or I don't really believe in punishment, but you punish them for not giving their best effort. You don't punish them based on the execution, because that's often something that is outside of their control. There are other factors associated with that. So understanding that and understanding how to work with kids when they work differently, when they are giving their best effort, and rewarding that effort is something I believe to be very important. I'm going to go kind of in depth into tools and protocols associated with all of these types of mental health conditions, but I wanted to add a little bit more context there associated with ADHD. Some other things that can be very effective for this is making a lot of practice, a lot of work, a game. I would argue there's a huge relationship with kids with ADHD and playing video games, or the gamified nature of things. They can go and get into this hyper-focused state when things are more gamified. Also, variety and novelty can be a huge leverage point for coaches. We saw this very much with Roger Federer, with his strength conditioning coach, Pierre Paganini, and Severin Luthi, his operations coach, varying practices every day, making them all different, giving them constant stimulus and a physical outlet. The next thing I'd like to talk about is anxiety and depression. So what are these two conditions? Yes, they are different, but I also think a lot of the things in sports that can contribute to depression and anxiety are related, or there's a ton of overlap in those. So I wanted to talk about them in tandem. First, depression. So depression, or major depressive disorder, is a mood disorder that involves persistent feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and lack of interest in life. It's more than just a feeling of down for a few days. Depression can last for weeks, months, or even years, and impacts all areas of life. So everyone feels down. I don't think that there's anyone that's feeling good all the time, even for days, maybe even weeks at a time. But something that persists even beyond that would be considered major depressive disorder. Anxiety, on the other hand, is characterized by excessive worry, fear, or nervousness about everyday situations. So while occasional anxiety is normal, just like occasional sadness or downness is normal, especially in stressful situations, anxiety disorders involve intense, persistent, and overwhelming feelings of fear or worry that interfere with daily life. I think a lot of sports have a prevalence to create anxious environments. We have clear outcomes. We have people relying on us, our coaches, our teammates, and this can create an environment where the athletes feel a tremendous amount of pressure, and that pressure can turn into anxiety. Particularly in sports, we talk about performance anxiety. So what are some of the conditions within sports that might contribute to additional major depressive disorder or anxiety? So one of the first ones is loss of identity outside of your sport. This is Michael talking about what this is like for him.
Throughout my whole career, I looked at myself as an athlete, not a human being, right? Like I didn't see this in the mirror. I saw my cap and goggles going out to race. Like I didn't see myself as Michael Phelps, the person. So my identity was strictly around the pool. And that took a long time for me to understand and process and to realize that I am a human. And I think really over the last 7 years, since I retired, I think that's where I've finally been able to see, I'm a human being. I think it's so important to make sure, you know who you are and you can find who you are.
So when you're a swimmer, when you're a professional athlete, when you're doing this at the highest level, it's really easy to attach all of your success to what goes on in your field of play or in your sport. If you don't succeed in swimming, for example, you might think that you're not a good person because you've attached all of your worth to being a swimmer. And if you're not a good swimmer and you're putting all this effort into it, what are you? That's absolutely not the case. We are far more dimensional than just being athletes or swimmers or whatever it might be. But it's really easy to lose sight of that. Something that I think is very inspiring is that a lot of professional athletes, they do go on to have success outside of the pool. The hard work, the dedication, the discipline, the compartmentalization, a lot of these things, these skills that they develop are scalable to other things. But in the moment when you're competing, in the moment when you're training towards something, it's really easy to lose sight of all those things. So Michael Phelps is so much more than just a swimmer. He's one of the most mentally tough people of all time. He's someone that has helped a lot of people through swimming, through water safety, through a lot of these things. But when he's focused on winning a medal and he doesn't, when he's focused on hitting a time and he doesn't, it's very easy to lose sight of all of those things. Another thing that can contribute to both of these conditions is injury. And when athletes get injured, there's a risk of them losing it all. There's the risk of them never being able to come back. And when you've dedicated largely your life to something, that can be an unbelievably scary position to be in. This is Michael talking about what that experience is like. I withdrew from the meet and went to Baltimore. An MRI showed what's called a pars fracture from repeated bending and stretching. Maybe I'd had it since I was a kid, maybe not. The doctors told me to wear a removable brace for 6 weeks and to stay out of the pool. I didn't know what to do with myself. I had no structure, no rhythm, no routine to my days or my nights. One of my good friends was in college at a town in Maryland's Eastern Shore, and so we decided that first weekend of November to go out there, road trip. I had just gotten my new car, a silver 2005 Range Rover. One of my friends made sure to tell me before we left, no drinking and driving. I said, come on, that's not me. This is before Michael had his first DUI, I believe. And the injury took a lot of the structure, a lot of the systems and drive, and a lot of the building blocks of his life out of play. And for athletes, especially if they have a very structured routine, losing that routine immediately via an injury is something that leads to doubts, to carelessness, and a lot of these other things. And this, I think, was one of the major reasons why Michael made this first big stumble in his career. Michael says, I could feel something wrong one day when I dove into the water at practice. My heart was accelerating, and Bob suggested I see a doctor. Because I was very flexible and had long hands and feet, I had some early symptoms of Marfan syndrome, a disease that affects connective tissues and could be fatal if there's leakage to the vessels that lead to the heart. So Michael also had a scare with Marfan's. It ended up being just a salt deficiency, but something as little as not feeling right when you're used to your body performing at the highest level all the time can be unbelievably scary. Without a doubt, athletes wonder, oh my God, what am I going to do if this doesn't work out? And that can lead to a tremendous amount of negative mental health stress. So injury is something for athletes that creates a lot of doubt around their own success. There's other factors that are outside looking in that can contribute to how athletes view their own conditions. So a lot of the time for athletes, showing any weakness, showing that you might have challenges or be facing things that are scary, like depression or anxiety, there's a stigma that they believe that it could hurt their performance. So one thing I heard a lot in the Weight of Gold documentary is that athletes don't want to show weakness, largely to their competitors, to their coaches, because they believe that's something other people can use against them. So this idea that you're constantly working, you can't show any of this, nobody else is showing any of this weakness, people are going to jump on you if that's the case, they're going to erode your advantage, they're going to take these things away from you, can be a very scary thing for a lot of people. And this is one reason why a lot of mental health conditions in athletes go undiagnosed, is that they don't want to admit anything's wrong because they're scared of what that looks like to their competitors. They're scared of what that looks like to their coaches. They view that as potentially being a sign of weakness. And it absolutely is not a sign of weakness. Being able to face these things head on is actually an incredible sign of strength. But unfortunately, it's stigmatized the other direction. I think that this is largely changing, especially in Olympic circles. But I think observing this is a really important thing. If you're someone who is struggling with things and you don't feel like you can talk about it because you don't want to give up an edge, I think that that's inherently problematic. It will harm you more in the long run not talking about them than addressing them head on. Another aspect that contributes to this is the always chasing nature of athletics. This is Michael talking about his pursuit of gold medals, his experiences in the Olympics, and how he never really got to reflect on it.
So after the first Olympics, I was in the water the day after I finished competing to get ready for the 2004 Olympics. After the 2004 Olympics, I was in the water, I think, a week after, getting ready for the 2008 Olympics. After 2008 Olympics, I pretty much said, go fuck yourself. And I took 6 months off and I didn't do anything. So yeah, I mean, there was no real time for me to sit back and to understand what I was doing. We were always chasing something, pushing ourselves to bigger limits.
Something with sports, almost until the end of people's career, is there's essentially always one more. So when Michael finishes an Olympics, at least in 2004, he was in the pool the next week, trying to think about how to improve on Athens and win more medals in 2008. There's always something more, and you run into problems when there isn't more to get. So in 2008, when Michael won the 8 golds, I don't think there is any reasonable way to improve upon that. And so there's this incredible feeling of loss and confusion of, I've conditioned myself to always chase. Now what do I do? This is Michael talking about if he could even celebrate winning 8 golds.
Once I win one, I had to be able to in one ear out the other, right? Because there was 6 or 7 more that I was trying to swim or win that week. It's hard to sit still because I'm on a whirlwind tour, right? Like that first week, 2 weeks, you're jumping all over the place doing different shows. But I think after that, it's kind of like, what's next? Who am I? What's my identity? And I think that's the scary part, right? Because I think you work so hard for me anyway, I feel like I work so hard to get to that point, and at the snap of your fingers, it's gone, it's done, it's finished.
It's interesting, especially in Olympic athletes, the payouts for achieving the things that you want, they're actually a lot smaller than you think. Michael winning 8 gold medals. Yes, he made history. Yes, he did all these incredible things, but how long does that actually last? A couple years. Once you've won, you have maybe a couple days to really appreciate it and let it sink in. Especially for people who've just maybe won 1 gold medal, which is still an incredible achievement. Before the next Olympics, you're almost completely forgotten about. And so you've worked for 4 full years to achieve something that really doesn't have lasting power. If you're thinking about, hey, I just won this medal. If you're thinking about the achievements that you've accrued, the hard work, the skills, the dedication that you've put in, that can last a lifetime. But unfortunately, it isn't framed in that way. Again, for Olympic athletes, there's also kind of a crazy long time between events. So if you're looking at 4-year cycles, that's a lot of time to think about a very small amount of work you put in. Let's take an elite swimmer like Michael Phelps. If you really only swim 1 race and maybe you're in the pool for 2 minutes, you're working 4 years for 2 minutes of work. That's not necessarily like a large payout. There's a lot of randomness. There's a lot of things that could happen in that 2 minutes where it could feel like all 4 years of that work was a little bit wasted. Of course, like most sports, there's other events over the course of the year. But I think for a lot of Olympic athletes, the Olympics is the thing. And there's a tremendous amount of pressure on these once every 4-year events. I mean, I forget what the skier's name, but he was looked at as a complete failure when he'd won everything else. And then in the Olympics, he didn't perform as well as he would have liked. I touched about this a little bit before, but there's this idea of what's next. Michael says, at that point, I just didn't have anything. It was weird going from the highest of the high, the biggest point of your life, winning 8 gold medals, and then saying, all right, where do I go from here? I wasn't motivated. I did nothing, literally nothing for a long time. I think that hangover from these events can be incredibly devastating. When you've dedicated your life to something and then you finally either achieve it or you fail, and you don't achieve it. I don't think it's a failure to pursue your goals or to pursue something great, because there is a risk of failure. There's an absolute sense of loss, especially if the next time you can work towards that goal, the next time you can compete for this thing is 4 full years away. That is a very long time for a lot of people. Another thing which I was very surprised about after watching that Weight of Gold documentary, outside of Michael Phelps, outside of the phenoms, for a lot of Olympians, there is pretty limited funds for track and field athletes, for people who are not established, gold medal winners, like a Simone Biles, Michael Phelps, these people who are at the pinnacle of their careers. There's actually a lot of financial stress around these things. A lot of the athletes, even in the Winter Olympics, bobsled, skeleton, these types of things, they're on a stipend of maybe less than $2,000 a month, and they have to work other jobs to be able to pursue their Olympic goals. And so there is financial stress associated with these things. Not everyone can, create social media accounts and try to monetize that way. Especially let's take someone in the bobsled or skeleton. They're wearing a helmet all the time. They're not this publicly known face that can get a lot of media attention and speaking engagements and these types of things. And there also isn't necessarily a guarantee of financial success afterwards. There's a pressure on this of chasing your dreams, but also a practicality and a reality that you have to survive. You have to make money. You have to provide for yourself, potentially for your family. And there's a trade-off between pursuing Olympic and athletic greatness and doing this. Maybe this doesn't apply in some other sports, but I think it actually applies more than you think. I mean, the minor leagues of other sports, the minor leagues of a lot of these domains, especially for people who have not had this immediate proven success and notoriety, can be unbelievably challenging, a grind, and finances are absolutely a distraction. Another big factor associated with this is opportunity cost. Opportunity cost, for those that don't know, is an economics term. So it's what you're giving up to pursue something. So a lot of Olympic athletes are giving up family. They're giving up time with their friends. They're giving up living a normal childhood, going to parties, having a normal college experience. Potentially, finances. I mean, one of the reasons why I stopped pursuing professional golf is I realized I could live a lot more comfortable of a lifestyle doing data science and coding for a living. And I could also have still a lot of the same experiences within the golf world without having to be on the playing side. And there's a tremendous amount that these people give up and dedicate for often very questionable returns. There's no guarantee that you win a gold medal. There's no guarantee that you make it as far as you would like. And I think that that's even worse now with social media, where you see the highlight reels of everyone's career. If you're following other Olympians, other people, you're only seeing the snapshot best parts. And unfortunately, you just see the upside and not the downside of a lot of what they're experiencing. There's a couple more of these. I want to make sure I really cover a lot of the conditions that make these challenging. Another challenge that these athletes face is the public eye. So a lot of people are athletes are heavily scrutinized. Again, we look at a Michael Phelps. Obviously, I think a DUI, these types of things, endangering other people is unacceptable. And I think Michael would agree. But there's also other aspects of Michael's career. For example, he was photographed with a bong, like a college party or something. That's not news now. It probably shouldn't have been news then. And when you are a high profile athlete, that's something that does come with the territory, but it can cause a huge amount of additional stress, additional downside. For example, for Michael, he felt like he was letting so many people down by all of these behaviors. For a regular civilian, a regular person, yeah, they're probably letting people down, but they don't feel like they're letting down millions of people. You also have anxiety around being scrutinized for every single thing that you do, which can be really challenging and very stressful. Michael says, I'd felt like I've gone from seemingly being on top of the world. The Olympics in Athens had ended a little over 2 months before, to being in the deepest black hole on the face of the earth. Peter, Bob, so Peter's his agent, Bob, my mom and I met to talk about what to do. I said, it's on me to tell the people what I'd done. I called friends and extended family. I also called reporters I had come to know to tell them what I had done, that I made an awful mistake and that I wanted each of them to hear it from me. I sat there for hours. The look on Bob's face never changed. He was extremely disappointed. Mom started crying. That hurt worse, maybe than anything. I'd never seen my mother that upset. I vowed it would never happen again. We worried that my sponsors might abandon me. None did. So there's this incredible fear and accountability that you have as one of these athletes that is a condition that other people might not necessarily have, and that can compound any of the mistakes that you make. There's also this aspect of kind of a downside of compartmentalizing. So compartmentalizing is an incredible skill. Michael is one of the best at it. Kobe became really good at it, largely through his alter ego. But if you're always compartmentalizing, you can often ignore when issues really get bad and they eventually explode. And this is something that Michael unfortunately had experienced. This is Michael talking about in 2018, the first time and hopefully the last time he was inflicting pain on himself.
That was one of the very last times that I tried to inflict pain on myself. And I knew at that point, like that was, I've never done something like that. I've never even thought about doing something like that. And the fact that I did, that right there was a message for me. It was it was a red flag. So, coming back to the house and I had a kind of a meltdown, but, with Grant, talking to, my wife, like that was just a learning experience. Like for me, like I basically am, a pot of water, like at the very last second, I'm ready to blow. And when I blow, it's pretty bad and it gets pretty ugly. I would say throughout my career, I'm great at compartmentalizing. I would say I could probably win a few more gold medals at that. But that's not something to be proud of.
So there's only two more aspects that I want to touch on in anxiety and depression. That first being concussion. So concussions have a comorbidity with a lot of these mental health conditions, with ADHD, with anxiety, with depression. And fortunately in swimming, this hopefully isn't much of an issue unless they're swimming into the end of the pool. But it's really important to pay attention when someone has a concussion. This can kickstart a lot of these things, can compound a lot of these challenges for the athletes, and for coaches and athletes themselves. It's way better to err on the side of caution with this. I recently saw Tua Tagovailoa. He doesn't want to wear the extra padding on the football helmets. I forget what the new helmets are called. And to me, that's such a crazy, silly decision. Because you can never be too careful with your brain and the trauma associated with that. Finally, the last thing that I wanted to touch on in the anxiety and depression section is retirement. So when athletes retire, I talked about it at length with Shane Battier in his episode. There's a complete loss. You've worked for this thing for so long, and the idea of what's next is front of mind. And a lot of the time, you don't know what else to do. You have that identity challenge that we talked about before. You're a basketball player, you're a swimmer, or whatever it might be. And having to context shift and change into something else is very difficult. There's also lower levels of physical activity when you retire. And as I would hope we all know, physical activity is one of the best things you can do for your mental health overall. So this loss combined with the lower level of physical activity, endorphins, these types of things coming from that, can lead to compounding of a lot of these challenges. Something I think is really important to note is most people feel at least some sense of a lot of these things. One of the really bad things is that a lot of these things compound, and we want to try to avoid that as much as possible. As coaches, as athletes ourselves, we want to be aware of all of these challenges. Just because we show some symptoms doesn't mean we're fully facing all of these things. But at the same time, it's important to know where you stand and also know how to adjust or reframe your thinking or get the right type of help to face any of these things. Just like how our focus of this podcast is pulling in together all these incremental improvements to get you to some incredible, great place. having a lot of these incremental challenges compounding can get you into a really bad place. And that's something we absolutely must avoid, because on this podcast, we understand the power of exponents and compounding returns. The next aspect of mental health that I want to touch on is suicide and suicidal ideation. I think that this is, it's pretty clear what this is. When someone is thinking about, taking their own life or actually going through with it. I will leave a link to the suicide prevention hotline. This is a topic that I don't feel like I can do enough justice to. And if this is something that you're thinking about, I think the general warning signs are people are thinking about it. Planning is the next step. And then actually going through with something like this is a terrible tragedy. So if you're at any of those phases, if you know someone at any of those phases, please try to seek help. Please talk to someone. That is an unbelievable, important thing that you must do. The next aspect of mental health that is dramatically more prevalent in athletes than in the general population is body image and dysmorphia. So according to that International Olympic Committee report, eating disorders, including anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder, and disordered eating, abnormal eating behaviors, not meeting criteria for an eating disorder, among elite male athletes and female athletes are common. The estimated prevalence of eating disorders and or disordered eating among athletes in general ranges from 0 to 19% in men and from 6 to 45% in women, considerably higher than in non-athletes. Data on elite athletes is sparser, but they also show significantly greater risk in elite athletes than in non-athletes. So some of this, I think, is associated with the culture of sport. You look at fighting, you look at swimming, you look at endurance running. In general, being lighter, making your weight, doing these types of things does have a performance boost, but that's only to a certain extent. So if you're making yourself unhealthy, you're making yourself sick to be able to get to these weight ranges or whatever it might be, you're going to be performing dramatically worse. But psychologically, people don't always necessarily see that. There can be pressure from, again, the athletes themselves, thinking they have to meet these specific body conditions. There's pressure from coaches talking about losing weight, talking about these types of things. And there's also pressure from society. You look at, for example, Zion Williamson, is definitely larger bodied, and there's a lot of pressure from the news, the media, for him to change his behavior. I think that, him doing that in a healthy way, going about it to improve his performance and eat the right things and get a chef and nutritionist and these types of things, there's something to that, absolutely. But the amount of awareness and him being called fat in the media is something that can absolutely be detrimental for his mental health and for a lot of the other things that come along with that media attention. There's also a link with eating disorders and performance enhancing drugs. I think that this is under the broader umbrella of body dysmorphia. If we think we have to be physically different in order to compete at the highest level, if we're willing to make ourselves sick, if we're willing to throw up after every meal, is it really that far to start taking something to get your body to look the way you'd like it to meet certain criteria that you want to have? And again, that's, I think, an unbelievably sad aspect of a lot of sports, and coaches and athletes being more aware of this and being more considerate around body conditions is very important. Some things that a lot of people forget is, as athletes, everyone has their own unique characteristics, genetic makeup. Some athletes might hold on to more fat. Some athletes might build muscle more easily. It doesn't mean that your body makeup is necessarily wrong, but you have to cater to what your genetics tell you. And sometimes getting to a certain weight is unattainable for someone based on their genetics. So eating disorders are also comorbid with exercise addiction in athletes. Exercise addiction, again, is sort of a form of body dysmorphia as well, as you are addicted to running your body down because you're not happy with either your performance or how you look or something along those lines. These two conditions, the eating disorders and maybe broadly under that umbrella of body dysmorphia, I think are very common in these athletes because there is this system that encourages or celebrates a specific physique, a specific way you look, a specific type of performance. And there's a lot of confounding pressures associated with that. We talked a little bit about body dysmorphia. Some of that does fall under drug abuse. So athletes will be using steroids, performance enhancers, because they're not necessarily happy with how they look. You see that a lot in with professional bodybuilding and some of these other sports. There's also the other side of performance enhancement and trying to reach another level that is maybe not done naturally. There's some aspect of desire to win, some aspect of unhealthy addiction to outcomes that can be associated with those types of drug abuse. There's also drug abuse associated with alcohol use, with recreational drugs in these athletes. It does not appear that this is more prevalent than in the general population. I want to be clear with that. But just because it's not more prevalent in the general population does not mean it's not a problem. Athletes are, from my observation, are probably more prone to binging behavior. So if you're in the season, you're competing regularly, you're probably largely abstaining from alcohol and other recreational drugs. But in the off season, where you feel like you've saved up and you want to kind of let loose, there's more of an inclination to go too far because you've been avoiding doing these things for so long. Alcohol and a lot of these other recreational drugs, they can compound a lot of these other negative mental health conditions. And I think that is something that's really important for us to observe and understand, is if you are struggling with any of the things we've described, alcohol is literally never going to make it better. Outside of alcohol, stimulants are probably the most abused drug outside of alcohol. You look at athletes using nicotine, caffeine, and any of these types of things. Again, not necessarily bad in moderation, normal use. There are performance enhancing aspects of caffeine and nicotine, but anything done in excess can have these negative effects. And stimulants can have a withdrawal towards the end. It can have the downside, the hangover associated with things too. They can compound anxiety, can compound major depressive disorder, can make ADHD symptoms and these types of things worse. Similar to drugs are additional risk-seeking behavior. So additional risk factors for elite athletes include their desire for competition and challenges, high levels of sensation seeking and impulsivity, and increased risk-taking behaviors. This is more likely to happen than in the average population. This is largely because athletes are wired for adrenaline. They're seeking the thrill, the rush of competition. They're pursuing that. And that's kind of hard to find in other places in your life. And if you're looking for that rush, this is something we observed in the Tiger Woods episode. You can find that through gambling. You can find that through, again, high risk behaviors that generally aren't necessarily good for your overall life. And this is also something associated with increased testosterone in men. There's a book called The Winner Effect. Essentially, when you're continuing to win, there's a biological feedback loop where you're producing more testosterone, and higher testosterone can lead to more behaviors like this. So there's a biological as well as a psychological desire for these types of risk-taking behaviors. This is, in my opinion, one of the pitfalls of a lot of great athletes is they are seeking what they are looking for, what they're finding on the field or in the pool. And the only place they can find the similar feeling is in things that might kind of destroy their lives. The last topic I wanted to touch on is sleep disorders. So insufficient sleep is defined as less than 7 hours of sleep for a healthy adult. Adolescents and younger adults need 9 to 10 hours of sleep. National Collegiate Athletics Association surveys indicate that over half of collegiate athletes in the USA report regularly getting insufficient sleep. 50% report less than 7 hours of sleep per night in season, and 79% report 8 hours or less. So a lot of athletes are also less likely to sleep the night before a competition. There's a lot of things that contribute to not getting enough sleep. So you have irregular travel conditions, you have early practices, you have a lot of demands academically in college and professionally. This can lead to insomnia, circadian dysregulation, and sleep apnea. Those are largely the three types of sleep disorders we see. Insomnia can be related to anxiety, circadian dysregulation, which just means the regular sleep cycles that you go through is disrupted. That can be done from taking stimulants. It can also be done through weird travel schedules, going to different time zones. And then sleep apnea is also a big one in athletes, especially if you're, for example, a football player or someone who's lifting a lot of weights. Sleep apnea can be an issue because of the muscle mass that you put on. I have a full episode on sleep and sleep disorders in athletes with Dr. Grandner. That's going to be coming up. That's the first interview of this series. That to me is a must watch, because sleep disorders have a massive comorbidity with pretty much every mental health disorder. The number one thing you can do that is free for helping with mental health is getting a better night's sleep if you can. In that episode, we talk through all the protocols, essentially the number one thing you can do to maximize your sleep. Not saying sleep is a cure-all, but it can definitely help with a lot of these different things. Those are largely the types of mental health conditions that athletes or the general population can see. I think, it was important to talk about some of the reasons why these are compounded in athletes in particular. Just the awareness of these things is enough to start making some changes as a coach or an athlete. This next section is going to be focused on the tools that athletes can use, and some of the ones very specifically that Michael used to stay ahead of his mental health as much as possible. I think it's important to note that mental health is not a destination. It is a consistent journey over time. It's something that we always have to work at. It's not just something that you solve. And that might be one of the biggest paradigm shifts for every athlete. But it isn't that different than the general athlete journey. You're never done. You are always in pursuit of the best version of yourself. As Michael said in I think it was episode 1, winning the gold medals, he didn't even look at them again. He doesn't even know where they are. What was important is the process, the things he learned, who he became, and who he continues to be. So, the first half of this episode was maybe a little morbid, quite sad. I'm really excited about the second half because it is all focused on solutions, opportunities, ways to combat this. I'd want to frame this entire podcast as something that's generally positive because we are spreading awareness. We're hopefully helping someone manage these things and realize that they're not alone in feeling a lot of these emotions or facing some of these conditions. I want to start this section, which is focused on tools and upside, of talking about a lot of success stories of athletes who have successfully transitioned, successfully reframed their careers, and done something incredible with their lives. First, I want to talk about Michael Phelps. So Michael got as far as, thinking about and almost ending his own life. And he was able to make this incredible turnaround that he still works at every day. But Michael accomplished these incredible things in the pool. And now he is really focused on helping with the mental health of a lot of athletes. That's something that's very close to his heart. And he was able to find a lot of meaning through doing this as well. Another swimmer, Grant Hackett, who was one of Michael's friends and great competitors. He's actually now the CEO of like a Fortune 500 company in Australia. He was able to take a lot of the things that he learned in the pool, a lot of the discipline and focus, and translate that into a business environment. We look at someone like a Shaq, who has gone on from basketball and has arguably had even better career in media. He owns a lot of these small businesses, franchises, and things along those lines, which I think is incredible. If you haven't listened to the Shane Battier episode, I would also highly recommend that. That to me is a great case study of how Shane was able to make a transition out of professional basketball and to reevaluate a lot of these different aspects of his life. Shane was able to retire on his own terms, but he was still lost. Another very interesting one that is, I think, more recent for me is Cam Newton. So Cam Newton has been able to be a very successful podcaster. I heard him talking about getting into logistics and transportation and is seeming to be very successful there. Cam, I don't think, retired on his own terms. He was effectively forced to retire from the NFL. And for these people to be able to make these changes in the face of a lot of confusing times, the loss of a clear direction with media attention, with a lot of these forces that we've discussed, I think is an incredible thing. And people should be interviewing them more about these types of things. Now, let's talk a little bit about Michael and how he went approaching his mental health and making the changes that he needed to make. He says, "A week after my arrest, USA Swimming held a fundraiser, an awards dinner called the Golden Goggles in New York City. Everyone makes mistakes, but I just want you to know I've never seen anything handled the way you've been handling it. I was told by Dick Ebersol, the NBC sports chairman. It meant a great deal to me that he said so. So how is Michael handling his, public disgrace, the DUIs? How is he handling his mental health? And the way he handled it was head on. He observed himself. He was able to ask for help. He was able to start doing protocols with the help of other people. And I think that that's something that a lot of people avoid. A lot of athletes will shy away from it. They'll say that it's not a problem. They'll continue to compress it. And that is not something that works. I think Michael did that for a while and it didn't work. And he realized that it hit a tipping point. The first step, the first tool of dealing with your mental health is awareness. That is one of the biggest parts of this episode, is we're talking about all of the different types of mental health challenges that you might face as an athlete. And you also have to realize that you are absolutely not the first one that's feeling these things. There's a lot of athletes and a lot more athletes that are talking about this now. And being able to have resources to learn more is, I think, one of the most first important steps. The other side of that is recognizing the symptoms. And we're talking through that now, recognizing the conditions that could compound these symptoms as well. There's also this aspect that I touched on before, is denial, feeling these things as a sign of weakness. It isn't a sign of strength or weakness. It just is. And being able to recognize them is really important. If we look at this from a sports perspective, the athletes that recognize where their weaknesses are in their game are the ones that get better. The athletes that recognize where they need improvement are the ones that get better. The ones that only focus on their strengths and ignore the things they need to work on usually fizzle out over time. Something I've reiterated a couple times also is that mental health is a journey throughout our entire lives. There is no destination. There's no point in time where we're just like, hey, I'm happy. We've made it. We've reached nirvana. That, unless you're some monk that's been meditating for 50 years, I don't really believe that exists. There's so many moving parts. There's so many things that change in our life. It is a constant battle, a constant balancing act. But that's also kind of part of the enjoyment of it, is we get to pursue this every single day. And something that Michael continues to reiterate is that it is okay to not be okay. This is something that happens to everyone. There are times when we all need help. We need to talk to someone. There are times when things get to be too much. There's times when we feel anxious, or we are worried about things happening in the future, or we don't achieve the things that we want. That happens to everyone. That is part of the human experience. And none of the athletes that we look at are superhuman. None of them feel perfect all the time. And if Michael Phelps, probably the greatest person to ever get in the pool from a performance perspective, is feeling these things, it's okay for you to feel them too. The next aspect of facing these things head on is seeking help. So this is Michael talking about why it was important for him to seek help for the first time.
I was at a dark spot in my life where I was prescribed Ambien from 3 different doctors monthly. I was happy I only had 3 pills left. It was the night of my DUI. My second one. I got home and I just remembered, I was like, fuck, I'm just going to take the rest of these and I hope I don't wake up. Meanwhile, I knew I was going to wake up. Right. I was taking 15 milligrams almost every night. I knew I was going to wake up. And I was just like, I hope this ends it. And I woke up. And for 3 days, I basically didn't leave my room. I didn't eat. I didn't drink anything. I just sat there. I was just being. And at that very moment, I was just like, fuck this. I got to change. How can I change? And I literally called 2 people and I said, find me some kind of help. Where can I go?
One of my biggest takeaways here is I don't think for athletes, especially after watching this, it should ever get to the breaking point where you feel like something needs to change or else. That is last case. We should be dealing with this run on. We should be looking at it like maintenance almost. This is something we're constantly working on. It's part of our routine, whatever it might be, rather than having this huge crashing moment where everything goes down and you have to rebuild it. If you need that, I think that's, some people get there and that's the only way they can recover. But if we're ahead of this, if we're constantly aware of ourselves, we have the right people around us, we're talking to the right people, that can largely be avoided. In terms of seeking help, I thought this was pretty telling. So Phelps and other close to him have cited the positive effects that the 45 days in rehab had on him. I wound up uncovering a lot of things about myself that I probably knew, but I didn't want to approach, he told Sports Illustrated. I think that this is one of the negative side effects of the compartmentalization. A lot of the times we know we have to work on something. We know something is going to hurt us in the long run, but it's easier to compartmentalize it, to file it away, and to focus on the other things that are quote unquote more important right now. Unfortunately, these types of things can compound. They can build up over time and explode. And that is absolutely not something that we want. We want to be able to face these things head on, but we often don't have a space to be able to do that. We don't carve out time to be able to do that, to focus on ourselves, to get everything right in the outside world, not just in the world of our sport. I talked with a friend, Julie Ellion, who works with a lot of professional golfers. She's like a sports psychologist. And she told me a lot of her work is not actually about on the golf course. It's getting people's lives right off the golf course. They can have some of the most powerful impacts on the golf course. You know, if you're at home, if everything is not going well with your wife, she doesn't like your travel schedule, things are rocky there, you're probably not going to play your best golf. If you're not happy with who you are, if you don't like the person that you are outside of the pool, you're probably not going to swim your best. And so the focus on understanding and improving your mental health can also have this performance increasing advantage as well. I'll also say having a network of people, not just a therapist or professional to talk to, can really help as well. Indeed, after his DUI incident in September of 2014, Michael certainly faced a whole new level of adversity. To his credit, he realized the importance of seeking help and dealing with the issues that had led to his terrible decision. Fortunately, he had people to turn to. Peter Carlisle, whose agent, his mom, his sisters, and Bob. Yet, while we were willing to help, we could offer only so much. We lacked the expertise he needed. Ultimately, Michael went to the treatment center, and over the course of 6 weeks, he was able to get the attention he needed. So these people in your life, your inner circle, the group you work with, it's not their role to solve your mental health, but they can help. And they can also help you get the right people, the experts to do this. That's sort of how I'm viewing this podcast is, you know, we're talking about a lot of these topics. We're trying to spread awareness. We're trying to get information out there. But at the end of the day, the best advice I can have if you're facing any of these things is to talk to a professional. That is the single best thing almost everyone that can do. And I'm here to help you. Hopefully your coaches, your family are here to help you to help find the professional to make this recommendation in any way possible. In terms of finding a professional, I thought that this was really interesting. So this is Michael Phelps talking about how finding a professional, a therapist, is like finding a coach.
You might have a hard time finding the right therapist for you, right? Like that's a process. Sometimes the therapist that you go to just, you know, it's not going to work right off the bat. So for me, like I had to go through a number of different therapists to make sure that I'm getting the right one that's going to help me move forward.
So when we're talking about seeking help, what does that mean? So one of the most effective ways to manage a lot of these things is psychotherapy or cognitive behavioral therapy. This is something I think is, again, time and time shown to be very effective. There's also things like acceptance and commitment therapy that can help with a lot of these conditions. I'm going to try to speak with a professional in one of these domains. I don't want to butcher exactly what psychotherapy or cognitive behavioral therapy, which is under this umbrella, is. But you know, that is an important thing to uncover. I will also say, I think there's a stigma around therapy. I think that people think it's really wishy-washy, talking about, hey, what do you feel? You know, and just sitting on a couch and someone taking notes. I would like to dispel that as much as possible. I think a lot of these therapy approaches are focused on problem and resolution. There's actionable things you can do. There's exercises you can do with someone who is doing psychotherapy. And it can be very much like pursuing sports. There's drills you can do. There is concrete tasks and ways that you use your mind that can create a lot of the outcomes that you want. Absolutely, it can help to talk to someone. But I think that a lot more than it's given credit for, therapists, the right people are creating actionable things for you to do rather than just having a place to talk. The next aspect of tools to confront a lot of these mental health challenges is pharmacology. You know, both my parents are doctors. I'm a huge believer in medicine. I think for some people, antidepressants, ADHD medications, a lot of these types of things are completely viable. And, there's also some new research, especially as it relates to PTSD and trauma, which I didn't talk about at length or really at all, but those are things athletes can face as well, especially as it's related to injury. There's some new research being done with psychedelics and combined with therapy, which I think is very promising. Not something I would recommend until it's, FDA approved and things along those lines, but they're making incredible strides with pharmacology combined with therapy, combined with speaking with professionals, which I think is a very effective route. I would always recommend speaking to a professional before looking at pharmacology. I think there's an incredible long way that you can go with psychotherapy as well as exercise, routines, and habits. But without a doubt, pharmacology can be a powerful tool, can be something that's temporary, that gets you to a place that is good. It can also be something that might be more of a permanent solution. A lot of this is based purely on brain chemistry. The next thing that I really liked is that Michael focuses a lot on routine. So by creating routine, by creating structure, that's one way to really manage a lot of these symptoms. We saw that Michael went off the rails for the first time when he was injured and he lost all of his routine. A lot of his routine was derived from swimming, but you can create your own routines outside of your sport. And I think that these routines are very, very important in giving you consistency, giving you some bounds in your life. So one of the most powerful tools that Michael uses is affirmations. So when Michael walks through a doorway, he reminds himself of a positive affirmation that he's going through. He creates a habit of this. And this is a lot related to the personal dialogue that he has. I'm a huge believer that, and science supports this, that what we tell ourselves becomes a reality. So if I always tell myself that I'm a bad swimmer or I'm not confident, I will inevitably not be confident, because that is the programming I've given to myself over time. This is an incredible way to continue to program yourself to believe the things that you want to believe about yourself. Michael's coach, Bob, did this with inspirational quotes all the time. These were related to his performance in the pool, but this can absolutely be extended to how you feel about yourself, the way you think about yourself as well. I also thought this was really interesting. A unique parallel between one of our other episodes is Michael talks about the voices in his head. And a lot of the time, the voices in his head were negative. Him saying he can't do something, or one of his critics saying something about him. On the other hand, in my interview with Jim Furyk, he was talking about the voices in his head when he was shooting 58, and how his wife's voice was in his head, his sports psychologist's voice was in his head, his dad's voice was in his head, and they were all saying positive things. That is something that I believe we can condition over time. And that's a powerful tool that we can have if you can recall these positive affects and have good things being said by the voices in your head over time. This is another clip about Michael talking about using affirmations going through the doorway.
My therapist told me to say an affirmation every time you walk in through a doorway. How many doorways do you think you walk through a day?
Wow.
In and out of the bathroom, and every single time, every doorway you go through, say an affirmation. So I would have like 10 or 15 affirmations just on hand. You just rifle through them. And it's unbelievable. You walk taller. It's so good. I mean, like, those little small things are so impactful, and they make such a big difference.
Well, there's other things that Michael does. Regular exercise is a really important one, especially for retired athletes. Making time for yourself, meditating is a big one. There's a lot of different things that athletes and former athletes and people can do to create routine that compounds a positive direction in your life. And that doesn't mean that routines can't be broken. That doesn't mean that you're not going to have setbacks. But routine is something that absolutely gives you a baseline to work off of. Another incredible tool that Michael uses is related to looking forward. A lot of these challenges are based on how you feel in the moment. And being able to time travel, being able to look to the future, being able to look even to the past about positive things that have happened is really important. Michael says, the night that I got behind the wheel after drinking, I said I had lost sight of my goals. I was not thinking, as I should have been, about Beijing in 2008. In order to make good decisions, you really have to see the whole picture. I said, I guess you could say that my head wasn't really on straight. My goals were not in order when I got behind the wheel. We talked so much about dreams, Dream Plan Reach in episode 1. We talked about how important a vision is in part 2 of this series. I think often when you get stuck on goals, you often lose sight of the big picture. Having a dream, having a vision, having something that you really look forward to at a high level that's bigger, that is purpose-oriented, can sometimes keep you on track. Even Michael Phelps, who had a very clear vision, he did get off track during these moments. And that happens. I think it's also important to be considerate with yourself and realize that nobody is perfect. But re-engaging with your vision, re-engaging with the things you want to do over time is one of the best things that you can do to get back on track. After his DUI, he says, I'm back in the pool training and have set new goals for myself in and outside of swimming for 2015 and beyond. That's what we all need to do when adversity strikes. Find help, accept help, and put the help to use. Then when you're ready, re-engage with your vision. That might mean having to reset your game plan and determine new goals. At first, you might find the going tricky, but understand you won't be the first to deal with such circumstances. I think that that's something that was really important, is Michael set goals outside of swimming as well. You can set goals with your mental health. You can set goals with how you want to feel about yourself. You can set goals with how you want other people to feel around you, with your community, with all these other things. And a lot of the time we get so singularly focused on goals associated with our sport, with, my podcast, with any of these types of things, that you lose sight of the fact that these powerful mechanisms can be used to improve your mental health, improve a lot of other factors around you. The next tool that he uses is sleep. So Michael is someone who slept a lot. That was a really important thing for him. I think later in his career, he was relying, as he said, on Ambien and sleep help. And that actually doesn't produce the same quality of sleep you have when you get sleep naturally. And so trying to get real high quality sleep, trying to take naps if you need them, is something that is, again, one of the best things that pretty much across the board can help with all of these types of mental health challenges that people face. Again, I have that episode coming up after this one with Dr. Grandner about sleep protocols and how athletes can get the most out of their sleep. Something else that Michael talks about in a podcast with Tim Ferriss is reading books. So Michael was a student of the game of swimming. He also became a student of his mind. He is someone who's constantly in the search for information. He's getting books from everyone. I think Ray Lewis is someone who recommended a lot of books on meditation, books on mindfulness, books on understanding himself. Maybe it's not just books, but seeking out information, being a sponge and trying to understand what you're going through is a very powerful portal to realizing that you're not the only one facing a lot of these things. Another big aspect of this is journaling. This is Michael talking about using journaling to get out of some of the darker moments.
I have like 10 different journals or like little notepads sitting here. And some of them are the bad days. Some of them are good days. Some of them to-do lists, like all this stuff.
Right.
I am in that moment where I'm spinning. I try to go back and I look, or I just get it all out.
Okay.
And it's like, I go back to all the notes that I have and just the memories, right? Because, and I feel like those thoughts and memories they're probably, for me, it's like little things that trigger something. And it's like, how do I control that? And the only way I can control it is either getting it out, or like for me is looking at something from the past.
So I'm a huge fan of the Founders podcast. So it's a podcast that focuses on understanding the greatest entrepreneurs of all time. And something that I've learned is maybe one of the best things you can do for understanding yourself, for telling your story, is journaling. By journaling, you can go back and you can understand the decisions you were making. You can understand the feelings that you had. You can sort of relive some of the good moments and you can interpret some of the dark moments. Journaling is a great way to collect data, great way to better understand yourself. And a lot of mental health is about purely understanding yourself and what makes you tick, what makes you feel certain ways, what you can do in certain situations when you're feeling things as a way to react to the challenges you face. I forgot the CEO of Whoop's name, but he basically has protocols for when he's feeling very specific things that can turn his mood around. And I have similar ones. So for example, if I'm feeling low energy, I can go for a walk. I can take a cold shower. I can do 100 jump ropes. I can obviously drink coffee or something along those lines, but I have a whole list of things, a whole list of protocols for when I feel a certain way. If I'm feeling anxious, which I do from time to time, I know the number one thing for me is to get some exercise, to start moving around. This is a little embarrassing, but something that really helps me when I'm feeling that way is like I put on music and I'll just like dance by myself. I think that knowing again and understanding yourself through journaling or through some of these other protocols is a way that you can create a kind of an operating manual for yourself, which can come in tremendously handy. The next tool, or maybe not a tool, maybe a thing to avoid, is social media. So there's a great book called Stolen Focus. There's a lot of these books around ADHD now and the role that technology has in it. There's also a lot of good research around how there's a very high correlation with social media and the uptick in mental health challenges going forward, especially in kids. And social media, one, is very addictive. Two, it gives you this skewed view of the world where you're only seeing the highlight reel of other people and you're living your own experience. And that can create a lot of negative feelings that you're not good enough. That can create some of these body dysmorphia ideas. Something I'm seeing a lot on YouTube now is there's like a prevalence of people talking about being on steroids. While I think it's good that people are transparent about these types of things, I think people now see that, wow, this person is absolutely jacked. They're talking about being on steroids, but they can talk about the negative side effects, but you don't really feel the negative side effects of some of these types of things happening. For example, with using TRT or testosterone too early, you don't like feel the negative side effect of it having fertility issues with men or things along those lines. And I think that paints a inaccurate picture of what's going on in the real world. And so I'm not saying completely avoid social media. I'm not saying I genuinely don't think it's good, but I use social media. I have to for my business. It's like an inevitability of the life that we live now. But I would say that make social media work for you rather than the other way around. Also for athletes, social media is probably the number one way where you get criticized publicly. And that generally is not good for us. It's good in some aspects, maybe if you're looking for motivation, maybe if you're looking for these other things. But for most people, it is, in my opinion, a net negative, especially if you want to reach the pinnacle of your profession. You should not be caring about what these other people on the internet say. If you really do want to get valuable feedback from it, have your coach or someone else read the social media and filter it for you. That's what I would most recommend. The last topic, which is fairly long, is the importance of people and creating this community around you, having a mentor, having a coach, and the roles that they can play in helping to improve your mental health. I want to talk first about Michael's coach and agent, then about his family and the role that they played in framing how he thinks and also helping with his mental health. With Bob Bowman, again, who we talked about quite extensively in episode 2 and 3, something I didn't necessarily mention in those episodes is how he also made swimming practice fun, especially when Michael was younger. And this is something that we talked about with Roger Federer, where they're adding variety, they're adding new things, they're gamifying things. When Michael was young, Bob would absolutely do this. And this is something I think that helped really endear swimming to Michael. He says, swimmers did serious work at North Baltimore Aquatic Club, but there was also time for fun. We played a game called Categories in which guys would line up 20 feet from the wall who would have a topic for the game. Ice cream, for instance. We'd go along the wall with a swimmer in each lane. And if another swimmer named your flavor of ice cream, you'd have to race against him. So again, there's these little things where I think Bob is doing a lot of the right things. I think also on the other side, Bob will admit that maybe he pushed Michael a little bit too much. Maybe he didn't approach things in the best way. And maybe he also didn't know a lot of the things that Michael was facing. And having those types of conversations, I think, can be important. You know, early on, Bob is also teaching a lot of the kids at the North Baltimore Aquatic Club visualization. He's teaching them a culture of excellence. He's teaching them a lot of these important skills and teaching them structure, which I think overall has a very positive effect on mental health in the long run. There's some of these other things, maybe once you get to the next level of sport, that really compound a lot of the negative side of things. I think sports at the non-competitive level, you're probably doing like a really positive thing for all kids. And then once you start to reach a certain level of competition, if it's done incorrectly, it can really compound a lot of these mental health conditions. You know, Michael's family also played really important roles. Michael's mom was probably the most important person in his life, maybe tied with Bob Bowman, but I didn't really talk about her enough. I feel like I should do her a little more justice. So she was a teacher. She ended up being a principal at one of the schools in the Baltimore area. And she had an incredible way of working with Michael, where I believe she treated him very maturely for his age. She didn't tell him what to do. She helped him problem solve on his own. For example, he said, my mom would rarely say no to anything I did, even if she thought it wasn't a good idea. Instead, she'd say, oh, I see, and start nodding. That meant to me that she wanted me to rethink the idea on my own, so she didn't have to give me a lecture. I can read the nods that mean no pretty well by now. They're usually followed by a list of every consequence under the sun to make me reach the conclusion that the plan just won't fly. You know, Michael's mom left the decision up to him to forgo college, to turn professional, to do a lot of these things. Very much how Roger Federer essentially just decided to turn pro at 16 and not tell his parents. But I think a lot of this autonomy, a lot of this ability to make decisions on your own allow you to take your own mental health or some of these other things into your own hands. It's not up to anyone else. It's not up to our coach. It's not up to our family to help us face these things or to be aware of them. Although it helps incredibly, a lot of mental health is up to us to take that step, to be the first person to take it on, to recognize there's a problem. And that can be hard. But if you have autonomy, if you understand yourself, if you're willing to make those steps, it can be one of the most rewarding things that you can do. We've covered a lot in this episode. We touched on a lot of the mental health challenges that athletes face, and also how they're compounded by some of the aspects of high level sports, some of the coaching strategies, some of the environments that a lot of these athletes are in. We talked a lot about ADHD, anxiety, and depression, and many of the reasons why these are perpetuated. We also talked about suicidal ideation, body image, dysmorphia, drug abuse, risk-seeking behavior, sleep disorders. We've focused a lot on some of the tools and ways that athletes can get the most out of themselves in regards to their mental health. Especially, we focused on awareness. We talked about seeking help. We talked a little bit about pharmacology, routine, refocusing on goals, sleep, research, learning more, journaling, avoiding social media, and the importance of the people and the communities in our life. I want to thank you for listening to this 4-part series on Michael Phelps. I have some incredible guests coming up to talk deeper about these issues. In the next episode, I interviewed Dr. Grandner, who is all focused on sleep. I also have Allison Brager, who is an expert on circadian rhythms. And I'm going to North Carolina to do a couple more interviews with some very impressive military people about their assessment and evaluation, which I think fit fairly well into this category. I'm also going to try to find some mental health professionals, particularly a sports psychiatrist, to talk a lot more about some of these challenges athletes can face and some more concrete solutions that are a lot more nuanced than I go into depth here. If you're interested in any of the research that I cited, any of the resources that I've used, I highly recommend checking out the show notes of this episode. I have links to every book I've read, every research that I've scoured, every YouTube video, and every podcast interview that I've studied. In particular, for this episode, the Weight of Gold documentary is very, very powerful. It made me have a very different perspective on the Olympics and Olympic athletes and the things that they go through, the adversity they face, and the immense pressure that is put on them. Thank you so much again for tuning in. I think this is probably one of the more important episodes that I've ever made, and I'm very happy that I can share it with you all. Until next time, let's continue to pursue excellence together.